Like anxiety is, degree of threat over resources. Got a bigger equation to explain it. And yeah, we want to feel like protected or that it's not true and that we're going to be fine. But I can tell you, the government will never tell us. They will never disclose anything because no government will tell you that there's a power higher than them, especially out of this world. America will never do that. They will do whatever it takes to keep this information secret. So I'm not holding out hope for them at all. I think the answer is in our own personal journey, in the experiences of others. So give value and weight to those. Try not to jump, and you get so, but a lot of people do, is like jump to, well, there's probably a star, it's probably this. Now get their emotional experience. Start out by believing and then step backwards, right? I had an encounter in 2015. I don't even think I called it an encounter till a few years ago. I was given perhaps like a lot of other people language and lingo to use. For me, I did refer it as a UFO in 2015, which was a very significant encounter. I was living in New Hampshire and I stayed at White River Junction at a hotel there. And 9 o'clock at night, I was out having a cigarette, and but I was out in the parking lot, and as I often did, looked at the stars, and the stars were just coming out, a couple of stars, and I was looking at this big star, and I was like, God, it's a beautiful star. And then to the left of it, there was another light star, as I thought of it, but then it started getting bigger. And what does that, right? And it got closer. I'm going to use golf terminology, but between a 5 par and a 3 par distance. So a 5 par is, let's say, 500 yards on average. A 3 par might be 180 yards. And at its closest, it's 150, 180 yards from me. The size of it's really hard to know, but I mean a truck size, but it wasn't shaped like a truck. And it was not completely circle, it was like an oval. And there's pictures of it. I did take pictures of it, but not, unfortunately, when it was at its closest. So I was out having a cigarette, had this encounter. It went towards me and away from me, towards me and away from me. There was no sound except that when it was close to me, it had an electric kind of buzz, humming, vibration, sound and experience. Describe it as being under power lines, that kind of loud electric sound underneath power lines. It was pulsating. It had a perimeter, and it was basically like breathing. I mean, literally, even back then, that's how I felt it interpreted what it was doing. Now it's so different when you see a light in the sky or you see something you can't identify that's a long way away. That's a sighting. But when something comes that close and comes towards me and away from me, that's communicating, in my opinion. I mean, that's someone or something trying to have a relationship of some form. So I'm there having a cigarette, had this whole encounter in shock. It's moving to about a par 5 distance, and I'm like, I got to get my camera, obviously. So goes off to the mountains. I go up to my room, and I'm just thinking about it. It's hard to get it off my head, and I fall asleep, and I wake up 12 to 13 hours later, and I'm the kind of guy that sleeps 6, 7 hours, so that's a long, long sleep for me. I woke up with this strange jet lag feeling. That's how I describe it. If you've traveled to Australia, it's like you're disorientated for 4 or 5 days, right? That's why they call it down under. Yeah, the pain was the first thing I remember when I woke up, and it was around my eyes. I describe it as orbital pain, all around my eyes. It was like head crushing discomfort. And as I'm waking up, I open my eyes and I can't see. Um, and that was the scariest because I'm like, what am I dreaming? Right? That's what you might think.
Did
But
you have no vision? It was just darkness, or was it just
black,
black? Okay.
complete black. Yeah. So I had that for about 4 hours of complete blackness. And then sight came back, 4 to 5 hours, pretty quickly within 3 to 4 minutes. Um, didn't tell anyone about that. I was kind of scared. I was scared about my health. I was scared about, like, God, what could this be, right? My biggest fear was not that, okay, I just saw something from what I interpreted being out of this universe, was shit, is anyone going to find out? I mean, it was a very, I mean, people think of Vermont, New Hampshire as kind of hippie, open-minded, but in the Dartmouth college community, it's very scientist research focused. I haven't shared this story a lot, to be honest, maybe three times. And then I check out of the hotel. But before I leave, I go and see the doctor, go and see my primary care doctor. I didn't tell him what happened because he knows professors at Dartmouth. We all know each other, internet connected. So I'm not going to tell him what happened, but I said, I've got some strange symptoms. I'm worried.
Mm.
And I told him, and he said, you were out in the sun. Did you get sunburnt? And because these are side effects of some serious sun damage. And I said, no, I haven't been out in the sun at all. He said, well, was it a dream? Was it a nightmare? Do you have any sleep issues? He basically put it down to a flu, like not a flu, a cold with nasal congestion issues, right? So when you get a cold and you're stuffed up and there's a lot of
Mm.
pressure around your face, right? I've had that 50 times like everyone has. It was not that.
Mm.
Um, but that was it. I left, and he said, take some Tylenol, Dayquil, standard stuff. And I felt kind of fine other than that. I mean, it was, the blindness, I call it sun blindness. I've been referring to that. He said, you were probably just asleep. That was part of a dream. Now, I know I wasn't. I can't prove that I wasn't, but that is a fact. Um, Go down to South Carolina. It's a long drive. Stop one stop along the way. And then, I just fallen in love. I met my wife. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't really want to think about it. I was starting a new life. I was so excited. And I didn't talk about it really until 2022, when I was out seeing Brandon Fugel. He invited me out for a few days, and I stayed with him in Utah. And he's got a great eye, not only for business but for design and deals. He's a brilliant man. I felt after that weekend like I was already on X and talking about this topic, but leaning more towards skeptical because that had to be my presentation. Like at the time, I was still working for those outpatient treatment centers, and I had to protect my business and my reputation even more so than I do now. That I didn't want to share my encounter at all. But after that weekend, I felt safe to. He just, I just felt totally safe too. And I shared him some of the images, and he was thought that they were powerful. And so, yeah, the first time I shared it was on Patrick Armstrong's show, Vetted.
Mhm.
I spoke to him yesterday. He wanted me to say hi.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I thanked him for the introduction because he introduced us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that is it's been sort of that the encounter has been public. I mean, it's not like such a big encounter, so it's become public. It's big for me. Now, for anyone else,
Sure.
probably not. But I am active on X. For me, it's sort of like this therapeutic escape. I spend most of my day helping kids and families struggling with severe anxiety disorders, which is my number one passion. It's not UFOs. My number one passion is helping clients see the value of fear. Like fear traps and controls us, but it has a lot of potential. It gets a bad rap, but if you can identify what your fears are and face those in a gradual, deliberate, strategic way, you are going to nurture a transcendent, powerful person.
Mhm.
A self-esteem marked by stability and strength. So my whole life is really around being an anxiety expert and helping kids break free from the constraints of that, helping them go from housebound to schoolbound. That's my life. So when you're doing that kind of work, which is can be 24/7 and a lot of travel. I travel around the country, around the world to help kids out that can't leave the home typically. Boy, the UFO thing is a great escape. Like I was super stressed. I gotta tell you this, Glenn. I was so stressed, and I went on vacation to Portugal. But I brought all that stress with me. And then I discovered your show. And I tell you, that was the start of my vacation. My wife was saying, "Hey, we got here, put the device away." But I
You heard
know,
it
but
here
there's this
first,
guy
folks.
called Dan Burrs or whatever. Dan Burrs, is that his
Dan
name?
Burrish, yeah.
Burrish. Oh my God, did I go down on that dive with you?
It's a deep dive.
Phenomenal. So, and then of course, and I told you this the way you describe um, the stuff that we can't talk to other people about, and I'm not even going to try to imitate how well you do that, but it just connect. There was a connection that you have with a lot of your viewers, because we feel the same as you. There's this deep interest and passion, and people might make fun of us for it and think we're kooky and all that. But becoming a PhD level person who in clinical psychology, and it involves a lot of philosophy. It involves a lot of spirituality in some forms. And when you're talking to people 6 hours a day for 25 years, you hear everything. How can one not delve into the land of sometimes the strange or the mystical or the unknown or the misunderstood?
What was your mindset? Do you remember when you had this initial experience, what you were thinking about?
No, no. It's sort of like when you have a panic attack, there's a lot of thoughts leading up to it because you know something bad's going to happen. You
Yeah.
know, it's anxiety in prospect of perceived or actual threat. This is just threat that appeared within 2 seconds. I didn't feel safe. I'd love to say to you, Clint, and to everyone watching, know, it was communicating loving thoughts, save the world, worry about the environment. Maybe it didn't share that shit with me, but I felt like it was just, I'm here to show you that I'm here and I can invade your space when I want. Now that I had a predisposition to anxiety, like,
I do
so
too.
maybe that's
I
mind. Okay,
totally. I understand it completely. I've been
okay,
to the point where I can't leave the house. I've had it so bad. I put my hand on the doorknob and I can't turn the doorknob. It's
okay,
for my whole life. It's been, yeah, a struggle.
okay. So I felt fear. I felt initially when it was at the par five, before it came to the par three distance, I was like, wow, I've this is incredible. And then it came closer, and then my immediate thought is get the F out of here, you
Do
know?
you feel that or did you get the sense that the anxiety that you felt in that moment was your natural anxiety reacting to this unknown that's right there in front of you, or do you feel like that response was being generated by the thing
Mm.
and broadcast to you? Was it intentional to make you feel that way, or was that just a reaction?
That's such a great question. Um, I didn't think it was intentional. I think it was me, seeing something that I couldn't fathom or explain, knowing it's interacting with me. No, it wasn't communicating in that way. That was my response. Other people might not have been as fearful as I was. I mean, it didn't in the moment. It wasn't creating any pain or there was no physical. You know, whatever you want to call it, it wasn't hurting me in the moment. It was a perceived threat that could turn into actual threat. But that's all based on what you know from your past experience. There's no past
Right.
experience with this. My only UFO sighting was in 1991 in Gloucestershire, where I grew up in England, and I saw a massive triangle. Looked like the moon. I thought it was the moon, but it was a
Mm.
triangle very high up in the sky. I just thought, okay, must be the moon. I was, 14, 12 years old, or God, no, it was maybe 88. I didn't even think about it because it's not that special. But, I was like 10, 12 years old, and I brushed it. But that was it. Like
Yeah.
there was no X-Files where I grew up. Um, you know, we didn't really talk about My Little English Village. There was no talk about UFOs.
Do you get the sense that? Well, let me ask you this: what has changed since then that makes you feel comfortable talking about it publicly now?
Less stigma. I started talking about my anxiety when there was less stigma. 15 years ago, it was snap out of it, Clint. Push through it. Be a
Yeah.
man. You
Yeah.
know, if I
Yeah.
could, I fucking would. I'm not stupid, right?
I know. I get it. I completely get it. It was yeah. That is definitely another conversation I'd love to have with you. I
Yep.
um I wonder. if you think now, kind of looking back on it from where you're at now, you mentioned Brandon Frugal and Gary Nolan, of course, Avi Loeb, pretty much everybody associated with the Soul Foundation. It seems like we're in a environment now where the stigma has largely been removed from this conversation, or at least we're in the process of removing the stigma, and maybe we're getting to a point where it can just be another topic of open discussion like anything else. Do you feel that way? What's your sense?
Yeah, I think it is as much as it can. It depends on the scope of the conversation, right? So I feel pretty comfortable to talk about things I can't identify in the sky, or even my interpretations of what I think it is, right? Or my belief that there are craft coming from out there, right? But I don't think it's safe to talk about, in my world, abductions, um, time travelers, some of the more,
Sure.
yeah. I mean, it was actually funny. I got to bring it up. I was watching one of your shows last week, and you wanted to have a check-in with Xander about, who I think's great, by the way. He said, "So Xander, I just want to check in. Where are your kind of thoughts right now about, the phenomenon?" And Xander says, they've changed, a little, and I'm just paraphrasing, changed a little. I still believe there's lots of species out there. It's like, 15, 20 species, but I don't think they're having sex with us anymore, or sex with humans anymore. I was like, oh, what am I getting myself into going into night shift? But so but I no judgment. That's where his beliefs have taken him, and my whole like mission on X is to try to bring us all together.
Mm,
Because I mean, if you go through my timeline, which I see as sort of one's autobiography in many ways, um, I'm really focused on kind of healing and repairing relationships and uniting what can be there's schisms happening all the time. I mean, it's
sure.
like, post Christianity. I mean, just how many churches just kind of were created, and no, you can't believe that. You should do this and believe this, and oh no, it's demonic, or it's it's a craft from outer space. It's interdimensional. It's so easy for us all to be divisive and to be critical. And I actually was recently communicating, not one on one, but through some sort of messages on X, and Chris Bledsoe was responding to my text. I'm like, well, that's a good opportunity. I'm going to kind of keep dialoguing with him, and he has more of a belief that it is spiritual. It's related to God, and he sees this lady, and don't fully quite get it. But I did say to him, I'm not ready to kind of say what it is. That's just where I'm at. I'm not going to judge someone else if they are or not. And he said, I can't remember if he liked or if he said, "Yeah, I agree." But I was sort of almost surprised, because he's kind of set in his ways. And I've been on some spaces where he's like, feels like preaching a little. But that's
Mm.
more kind of his background. So I interpret it that way. So, yeah, so I think definitely stigma's way down, but depending on what the topic is, right?
It seems like the stigma is evaporating. I think we've got a ways to go, but it seems like we're in a place now where we can publicly start to have the conversation and not feel super freaked out that everything we bring up is going to be used against us in some way. I think it seems interesting to me that we've come to a point where it's acceptable to start talking about it, but because we don't actually have a lot of information to work with and we don't know what the unknown unknowns are, there is a lot of the speculation just runs rampant. You go from orbs in the sky to 8 foot tall praying mantis beings, and then you have
Hmm.
psychic control of craft and telepathy and all of this, and there's no real clear boundaries. It just sort of goes on. How do you make sense of this space, and how do you kind of keep yourself righted in such a bizarre landscape?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm very conscious of it, in many ways to protect myself. Like there are days and weeks where, and this is definitely a psychological phenomenon, where I'm more open to believing more out there kind of ideas, and where I want to side more with the believer community, and kind of reject or vilify. I wouldn't say I vilify, but like poo-poo the sort of debunkers, and the debunkers have served a great purpose. I mean, and value. I mean, Mick West has debunked videos, years before others, and we actually need that. We need people to keep us centered. Now, how he does it, how he communicates, could that be done better? Sure. And Brandon Fugel, right? He was terrified about coming clean. I mean, he was going to be anonymous the whole time. But um, I. I'm careful of it. Like I I'm very interested in the abduction phenomenon, very, and I don't talk about it much because I'm afraid. I mean, look what happened to you know John Mack. I mean, he got through it, but he was a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he was a
Sure.
Harvard psychiatrist.
Are very few absolutes, and it's difficult to figure out what to believe in a space where you also have certain personalities who seem to be a center of gravity around a certain set of ideas and beliefs that sort of they are locked into. I'm thinking of somebody like Stephen Greer or Lou Elizondo, or there's certain people. Chris Bledsoe's another that they're saying this is what's going on, and that's where we start. But it just seems so difficult to have a strong foundation to begin to stand on. I think that's kind of where we're at right now. We're trying to establish what is the baseline for the new
Yeah.
normal in a world where we're all accepting that this is a reality. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? Um, I'm curious. You say you're very interested in abductions, and that seems to be like the third rail, that no one really wants to touch
hmm
anymore. Can you talk about that a little bit? What is so interesting to you about the abduction phenomenon, and why do you think it has been not discussed as much as it used to be?
Yeah, I think I've done a lot of research recently, actually, on John Mack, and he doesn't talk about sleep paralysis a lot in its history. And maybe I haven't just seen those video clips or haven't in his writings. I mean, he does a little, right? Do you know how much have you uncovered that?
In Mac's work?
Yeah, if he's talked about sleep paralysis.
Um, you know, I would have to go back and reread to see how many times it comes up, but it's not something. The quote that I associate with John Mack and Abductions is one where he's on a show. We used it in the trailer for our channel. I just put it in there, a new trailer the other day, and he says something real is happening to these people. This isn't the way dreams behave. This isn't the way fantasy behaves. Something real is happening to these people. And then he kind of gets fuzzy on what real means. Like it's kind of a loose idea of, well, what's real to you and what's real to me? Are we talking about objective reality? Are we talking about a subjective version of reality? He doesn't, I've noticed he kind of walks back from that edge a little bit before he goes over, but he does say so these people are having a real experience and it's really truly affecting them. And it seems to be happening to a lot of people, at least at the time that he was looking at it. So the question is, yeah, I mean, are they physically being taken from a physical room and put on board a craft and taken away someplace and then returned? Or are they being communicated with in some other way and they're being made to think that they were taken aboard a craft when in fact they never left the room? Or is there still something else going on? I just think the fact that John Mack took it as far as he did shows me that there is a there. For certain, there's a there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're just now beginning to hear the very first new whispers of a conversation around that. They're just now starting to go there again. Just recently, I've heard Lou Elizondo mention it and a few other people in some interviews. I think that will probably be where we go next.
I can relate to how he went there, and I know it was stemmed by Bud Hopkins, or he was an influence on him or introduced it to him, right? But if you are a mental health practitioner, you really care about your clients. I mean, it deeply to the point where you really have to kind of manage it not interfering with your own life because for at least a good therapist, you are an empath and you feel other people's emotions. And and I sense Mac was one of those people. I can hear it in his voice. I can feel it from him, um, from beyond the grave, and I know the spot where he got hit in London. It was just so sad. But I never knew him. Um, but if I was there in those rooms, hearing those stories, hearing that struggle from people that didn't want these experiences, they wanted to figure it out. Like, please let it be a mental health condition. I mean, who says that? The problem with it, I will say, is that nothing else responds that way or behaves that way. But I mean, if you look at sleep paralysis, right, it does match up a lot. Because I do believe that a significant percentage of abduction cases are sleep paralysis. Um, I mean, they just match up. I mean, if you do some research on sleep paralysis, it sort of really does match up. I mean, they can occur during the day, right? Do you ever fall asleep in the day?
I've experienced sleep paralysis where
Okay.
I will wake up in bed and I can't move. And then I take a beat. I've gotten to a point now where I take a beat. I know that I'm alive. I know that I'm breathing. And then I just focus on one finger or one toe. And then I just get it to go. And then somehow I'm able to sort of bring myself out of it. But for a good 5, 10 seconds, there's that weird moment where you're just like, I've never had the sense though that there was anyone in the room with me during a sleep paralysis, anyone that wasn't supposed to be there, like my wife's there, but I'm just like
Hmm.
never like a apparition or anything strange. I mean, is that super common for people who they believe that there's something in the room with them or on top of them?
So sleep paralysis is experienced across a spectrum, and the level of sleep paralysis that you have is on the mild end, and
Okay.
that's a wonderful strategy, whether you're on the mild or major end, to get out of that paralytic state, is to start moving, different fingers and toes and parts of your body. But no, it's a small percentage that have the very severe hallucinations, the you know can't breathe, they feel like there's a weight on their chest. And so basically, why I think it doesn't answer at all is, well, I'll give you two reasons. One reason is, as a therapist, that my whole life is about believing people and believing in them and believing that change is possible and believing people are inherently good. And my default is going to believe someone. It's just who I am. Now, it doesn't mean I'm just gonna, just accept their claims, or I'm not going to challenge people. No, my work is connecting, guiding, challenging, supporting. But I believe in the value of subjective experience and subjective data and analysis. Um, Equally as so, like objective quantitative stuff is extremely important, but so is the subjective. And so, yeah, so that's one reason. I believe that they are real, they do exist. It's a small percentage of, let's say, those abduction reports. I don't know the percentage, but let's say it's 10 to 20% are
Okay.
real. Um,
Real in the
the
sense
other,
of they're actual beings taking somebody, abducting them, like an actual
yeah,
real. Okay.
that's my belief. Yeah, that's my belief. Can't prove it, obviously, but you look at well, the top three cases. The two guys, they
Oh,
recorded
you're talking about Pascagoula,
Pascagoula,
the
thank you.
Pascagoula case. Yes.
But I mean, that's just like, seems very convincing to me.
Two guys, adult guys, broad daylight, out fishing, see this craft. They come back
Yeah.
panicked. They're taken on board the craft, examined, come back panicked. The police or the sheriff of the town hides a recorder in the room where they're waiting, and then leaves and says, "I'm going to go get some coffee. I'll be back." And lets them just sit there for 15 minutes, and they are just freaking out.
Yes, okay, they became kind of famous. They went on Johnny Carson, they did XYZ. So what? They made something of it, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
life is hard. You got to make money. It doesn't change the validity of an experience. But yeah, I believe that happened.
Just to kind of play devil's advocate, can you
Mhm.
describe what is the confluence of events that come together to create the idea or the impression that one has been abducted, if in fact they are just suffering from sleep paralysis? is it a waking state of paralysis where the dream mechanism is still engaged, and so you're getting this blend of two different worlds? Is that what's going on for these other
Yeah,
cases?
I don't think I could articulate it better. Oh, I mean, in you know, in a sleep paralysis situation, they've woken up from their dream, and they're needing and wanting to act out that dream as if it's real, but at some level, right? Because they still are paralyzed, but they're awake and conscious, and it's like, they're conscious and they're seeing the dream, but they're paralyzed. They can't engage in it. I mean, it's terrifying just even to think about it. I have not experienced it ever. Um, Apparently, I think 50% of the population will experience one episode in their lifetime. I'm hoping I'm not
Wow.
one of those 50%. And then I believe, I'm going to look it up, but I believe 6 to 8% have hallucinations and, kind of, visions or images or experiences at a level that is at the sort of, I'm going to say abduction level or alien level. Um, and there are many stories, by the way. It's got nothing to do with aliens, right? It's monsters, it's car accidents,
Mm.
it's, because dreams serve a critical value for our survival. It's how we kind of process and work through grief and trauma and fear of the future. REM sleep is tremendously important. That's why when you haven't been sleeping well or you've got a sleep disorder, you're more at risk for depression and, well, suicidality and aggression and lots of mental health issues. Um, because we don't have enough time to the day to process all our fears. They've got to come out at night.
But that would be separate from cases which you're suggesting it may be as high as maybe 20% of people are actually experiencing a real event
Mhm.
that has some physical evidence left on them. Let me ask you this: in your professional experience, have you ever seen anything else that can create body marks spontaneously on someone's body? Is there another anxiety state that is capable of leaving somebody with, abduction marks or
Sure. Abduction marks, depending on how we define abduction marks, but
sure.
on the extreme end, there's a famous case of someone, I believe it was sleep paralysis, no, sleepwalking maybe, and they killed their girlfriend or roommate while they were sleepwalking. And he was convicted to even death penalty, I think, of the crime, and was going to go to the death penalty. He ended up, I think he got let out because he was a very good person, loved this person, would never have done that, but was literally asleep. To People sleepwalking and falling.
Yeah.
I'll give you a personal experience. I had when I was writing my dissertation, which is just like 2 years of a battle. There's a lot of fear, and if it doesn't work out, you could. For me, it was like out of my PhD program, get deported because I'm on a student visa. A lot of stress, right? Um, and I took some Ambien to sleep, and for me, it had a negative effect. It's a hypnotic, right? So it put me in this hypnotic state. I slept walked. I got in the car. Was driving around, kind of acting out a dream, maybe. But I felt like I was awake, but I wasn't. Got in my car and I was just driving around, going somewhere. I don't know really where, and drove off the road, hit a telephone pole, and saw fire. And got out of the car. My instinct was like, get out of the car, get away from it. Car exploded. The next
Wow.
thing I
How much
remember,
Ambien did you take?
Ambien. Yeah,
Do you
I
remember?
took two. Yeah, it wasn't not a
Like 10
certainly not
milligrams? I'll
too
take a
much.
5 and I'll break it in half sometimes. And even that's
Yeah,
plenty.
yep. I
Sure.
had never taken it. I took two, and then but there was another medication that I was on, and I cannot remember what it was. That it was a. Oh no, I know what it was. Um, ZzzQuil or something. There was some like over-the-counter concoction that was not good.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. The NyQuil sleep one. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I think it's
exactly,
just
something
liquid
like that.
Benadryl. I think, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah, so it was bad concoction. But anyway, I remember getting to the hospital and they said, all right, this guy's hopped up on drugs. He's on something. They gave me a drug test, completely clear, other than the Ambien.
Yeah.
And I, in a sleep state, left the hospital, signed myself out, got in my car, drove back to my hotel. Um, Woke up the next morning saying, wow, that was a weird dream. Like, literally think none of that happened. I go out, I was like, where the fuck's my car? I tell the hotel, I think someone stole my car. And they said, oh no, you went to the hospital last night. You came back in and you had the band thing. So a lot can happen, right, in your sleep. And did I have scars? No. Did I have two puncture marks in my ankle where something was, implanted? No. But yes, things can happen in your sleep.
Did you experience when you saw this unusual object? I think we could just say an unusual thing. Did you experience any sense of time dilation or missing time? Any strange dreams after that?
Yeah, it's interesting but time is very interesting to talk about because beyond I slept 12 hours, jet lag feeling, um, time slowed down, obviously, when it happens, as it does in a traumatic, when you're in shock, maybe, or, in a traumatic situation. But when I look back into that encounter, I would say it felt like a day or two. I mean, and to the point where people ask, dude, especially real believers, dude, you were abducted. They took you on a craft. Like they almost want me to kind of go
It,
there.
your story reminds me a lot of Terry Lovelace's story. Are you familiar with Incident at Devil's Den?
No, I'm
Terry
not.
Lovelace, he's an attorney who I forget when this took place, but it was when he was a young man, 1977. He was in the I want to say Air Force, and he was camping in this park near the base where he was stationed with a friend of his. They went on a camping trip, and he describes seeing these unusual lights in the sky. The lights are coming towards them. They experience missing time. And then when they wake up, everything's in disarray. Their clothes are on, their shoes are on the wrong feet. Everything's just a mess. And then he describes this situation where they are in such a panic. They're in the absolute grip of total panic that his friend is like, let's get in the car. We've got to get out of here. This is like whatever time in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere. They just leave all their camping stuff. They drive. They get to the first gas station they see, and Lovelace describes going in, and he gets this big, like 2-liter bottle of orange cola. It's the first liquid he can find. And he just drinks the entire thing. They're so dehydrated that they're just like, they need
Mhm.
fluids. And then he goes back, they get debriefed at the base, and they describe all of the weird medical symptoms they had, symptoms of radiation exposure. They're told not to talk to each other, not to discuss it ever again. It's a very interesting story, but it kind of starts out similar to what you described. They just see this weird thing in the sky, and it's coming towards them, and then there's this gap, and the gap is this other experience. It's just very bizarre. Do you think that's do you suspect that there's a chance you were taken on board a craft, or do you think something else may have happened?
Um, I don't have any memory of that. I don't want that to be the case.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I know that in the 12 hours of sleep and when I woke up the next day, um, beyond, first thing is pain, because I could feel it as I'm waking up, and then not being able to see. I'm not thinking in that space, but when the time thing really came in was after that. I was like, God, why am I so tired? Like it's like I've been hiking for a week, or I've done, I've been up for days, or it was a very strange experience.
Had you had any symptoms, or did you have any symptoms of radiation exposure? I mean, it seems like your vision loss and some of the eye pain could be. It's like you were staring at the sun almost. For
Yeah, that it felt like I was really burnt. I mean, to the point where I was staring at myself in the mirror, and I feel sunburnt, but why don't I see it? I feel like there's a rash on my neck. Like the irritation is crazy, but I don't see it. I mean, it's just not there. And then I have thought about radiation. It's sort of a silent, like has silent impact right on you. But I think there would have had to have been radiation exposure of some form or some exposure to something. Um, but I had no confirmation from that. I didn't have hair loss. I don't even really know what that would look like.
were there ever any other follow-on experiences that you associate with this experience? Have you ever had any other strange occurrences?
No, it's been disappointing that, okay, I had this big encounter. Everyone seems to have all these continuing ones. Like it opened up a doorway, and now I'm like interacting and communicating, and eliciting it. And
Hmm.
that shit ain't happened to me, and I wish, but I'm not out there meditating every night, you know. Um,
I don't know. John
and
Mack said this is a club no one wants to be a member of. That maybe you don't want to. He
yeah,
said this. No
maybe
one wants
not,
to be in
right?
this club.
Yeah. So no, I haven't. I will say that I had for about a year, I had some traumatic memories, flashbacks from it. Um,
Of seeing it there, or were they like disjointed memories of other things that you associated with this event?
oh, great distinction. I'd say a bit of both. I mean,
Hmm.
mostly it was a flashback of, like, I'll see a car light and at night, and it won't be expected, come around a corner, and I'll be thinking, and then I'll think about, Vermont, where it happened,
Hmm.
or the orb. It'll be ever since my startle response, totally different. Like, my wife, when she comes home, she'll say, "Hi, babe, I'm home," or if she's walking around the corner, she'll just do a little sound so I know she's there. Otherwise, I'll be like, I
Yeah.
literally will do that, and that has happened since 2015. Um,
So kind of a would you say that's a PTSD type of response, or
yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be a PTSD likely symptom. Yep, definitely.
T- tell me about let's change gears a little bit and then we'll circle
Mm.
back to this. Tell me about your continuity of consciousness theory.
Consciousness is not something that just turns on or off, but it's continuous. It goes on forever. It carries forward. It's something that's shaped by every experience that we have, every emotion, every interaction that we experience in our lifetime. And then if you step back from that and think about it, the sheer amount of data we accumulate over my lifetime and your lifetime, from every thought, every memory, all of our perspectives, it doesn't make sense to me that all of that would simply disappear when the body dies. So from an evolutionary standpoint, that's an enormous amount of adaptive value just vanishing. Another part of the theory, and I'm still finding ways to connect it to consciousness, but I do believe there's a link there, is that there's psychological balance at play too with this. The fact that we don't know for sure what happens after death is just as important as the possibility that something does continue. If we had absolute certainty, let's say, that consciousness persisted, would we still feel the same urgency to, let's say, create or love or innovate? If we knew we had forever, would we still push ourselves the way we do? So I believe that mortality is really the ultimate motivator. It can also be the ultimate source of someone's depression and paralysis. But it's the finite nature of life, really, then, is what's giving it meaning, or what gives it meaning. It forces us to contribute, to connect, to leave something behind, to figure out this topic, let's say. Because if we were immortal, I think our greatest problem wouldn't be death. It would be the unbearable weight of existence itself. I actually believe that if we were immortal, mass suicide would become our ultimate crisis, right? Like a sequel of Groundhog Day, where there's no escape from that repetition. So at the same time, I guess the uncertainty of when death will happen seems almost intentional. It's like if we thought about it constantly, it would be paralyzing. But because we don't know exactly when our time is up, we operate in this sweet spot where we are aware of it just enough to be driven, but not so much that it overwhelms us. That spectrum of awareness, to me, just, that balance between fear and purpose feels like it's by design, or that it's evolved to be by design. And honestly, that's what makes talking about this so fascinating to me, is that there are all these threads and, that connect back to how we experience things, like intuition, the UFO phenomenon, the psychic phenomenon, or even my fascination with NDEs, or near-death experiences. Of course, I don't have the answers, or even one answer to any of this, but it does make it fun, exploring the possibility that consciousness might be more than just an individual experience, that it's something much bigger, a part of a much broader plan. And really at the heart of the theory that consciousness is something that continues, right, in ways we might not fully understand, but that it does continue. Because I think if we choose to grant credence to the scientific validity of evolution, there's no reason why we wouldn't also apply it to consciousness.
Now, is it pooled somewhere? Is it transferred into another being? Or I don't know the transferal process, but it does not make sense from an evolutionary standpoint that it would have a terminal end based on its value for a species, but also just its beauty in many ways.
Yeah.
These emotional experiences that we have, these memories that evoke emotion. Emotion is the most powerful, force. I try to convince people with cognitive logic and reason, and certainly needed, but it's really emotion, bringing emotion into the room, into that relationship, evoking memory, personal experience to create change and purpose and meaning. And so yes, I think that it makes logical sense that consciousness continues beyond death. I don't know how. Will we have a sense of it? I expect that we will. I think NDEs are not just some neurological sort of organic way that we kind of cope with the loss, and I think that's the sort of skeptical theory, right?
Well, who was
I think it's
there was a
yeah.
doctor, I want to say he was a neurologist who had, he had a viral, was it meningitis? I don't remember what he had, but he was completely brain dead for a period of weeks. And all of his friends were his physicians that were attending to him. So these were all people at his level who knew him well. And he wrote a book about this. Do you know which book? You know what I'm talking about? He wrote a book about this whole experience he had while he was brain dead of his NDE.
I've heard the story. I'm blanking on it.
I cannot remember his name for the life of me,
Yeah.
but it sprang to mind when you were describing this, and it also reminded me of these cases you occasionally hear about children who remember past lives. A little 5-year-old kid who will be like, "Oh yeah, I used to live by the lighthouse." Yeah, and they're out in the middle of Utah, and they're like, "There's no lighthouse here," and then they take them someplace, and, "Oh yeah, this is where I was, and that's my old room," and
And do you know why I believe a lot of those cases? Because if you got a young kid, and we went to Disney World like 2.5 years ago, they loved it. Like you take a kid to Disney World, I mean, it's just they think it's all real, right? It's the real princess. This is where they
sure.
live, and they can't remember it. And I mean, they're like 6 and 4, right? And they were like 3 and 4, or 2 and 4, whatever. No memory, so they just don't have those memories don't form until later, or get fixed. And and you're getting a 5-year-old that's talking in detail about being in a war and their wife and using language. Yeah, so totally.
Can I
I
blow your
think
mind for a second? Can you give me your
I
professional
love
opinion
it.
on this?
Please do.
Okay. This is a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned this on a live stream. You may have seen me mention it, but a few weeks ago, I was with my son. It was in the early morning. It was probably about 7:30 in the morning. I had a cup of coffee. We're out in the backyard. I'm pushing him on the swing, and it's a beautiful morning. The breeze is blowing through the trees. It's perfect temperature outside. We're in Florida, so it's not super cold. We're just outside enjoying this little quiet time for about 5 straight minutes. It's just me and him, and we're just no sound, just not even talking, just pushing. And he looks at me and he goes, he's 3. I mean, you just saw him. He broke in here. You saw him.
Mhm.
He looks at me and he goes, "Daddy, you were on the roof last night." I go, "What?" "I was asleep last night. I didn't go on the roof." And he goes, "No, I saw you on the roof last night, Daddy. You were on the roof last night of the house." And I go, "I was on the roof of the house." And he goes, "Yeah, you were up there." I said, "What else do you remember?" And then he changed the topic and moved on to something else. I had no idea what to do with that statement, but it was really weird.
That was weird.
Super.
And what time of day did he tell you that?
It's 7:30 in the morning, 7:40 somewhere.
Right when okay.
We
So
were
he's been up
we'd
for like
just
half an
woken
hour.
up for about,
Just
we've been
woken
awake
up.
for maybe an hour or 45 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, and he's never said anything like that. Does he ever talk about his dreams when he wakes up?
He's never seen me on the roof.
But that's interesting.
Super weird, right? I don't know
Super weird.
where to place that. I still can't quite figure it out. I didn't let it freak me out too much because, He's, you're talking to a
Yeah.
3-year-old. You can only
I
make
mean,
so much
it's
sense
not
of it.
easy to get on the roof, right? It's not, you know.
Well, I mean, it would be, it's a whole thing. You got to go get the big ladder and stretch, and it's just,
Yeah.
he was in bed and sound asleep all night, slept like a rock. And then that next morning to say that. And typically when he has dreams, they're very it's very loose. He'll say, I had a bad dream. I go, well, what was the bad dream? And he was, oh, there was a scary monsters, it's the
Hmm.
bathrobe hanging on a hook or something. And he thought it was a
Yeah.
monster. Never anything. But this was like, I saw you on the roof. And I was like, no, you didn't. I was asleep. Yes, I did. I saw you on the roof with a 3-year-old child.
Statements.
Like
Yeah.
statements, very clear.
Wow. And is the roof visible from his window?
Nope.
No. Okay. Hmm.
So maybe we were abducted. Maybe.
There you go.
I'll
Yeah, I
see
got
you
a
on
lot
the.
of thoughts racing through my head. All right. Well, that's fascinating. Um, so yeah, where do we
Well, consciousness, continuity of consciousness, and I think the larger point I'm trying to drive at here is it seems like the evolution of the conversations in ufology have evolved over the years, and it seems like where we're at now is in a place where the stigma is being lifted. It's not maybe all the way lifted yet, but it's we've gone a long way towards lifting the stigma, particularly with the New York Times stuff in 2017. That was huge.
uh
And we've moved into this conversation about consciousness now. What is it? Why, Jake Barber is on News Nation giving interviews saying, I telepathically connected with a craft. And he describes it in vivid detail. He almost tears up and breaks out in tears on camera. You can watch that interview and see his emotions on his face. This lines up with so many other cases that we've heard in the past about telepathy. Consciousness is at the core of this. Somehow, consciousness is fundamental to our understanding of what these beings are all about. And I just wonder, as someone who's looked at this and thought deeply about it, and you've had your own experience, to what extent does consciousness factor into the larger picture of what we're seeing right now, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I mean, I think you've got to be, there's different ways to look at conscious and consciousness, but I mean, you got to be consciously aware of what's going on to see things. I think if, the more interested in the topic you are you going to see more things? Yes, because you're going to be out there looking more and you're
Mhm.
going to be more perceptive. Is that related to intention? It certainly could be. There's I've got some great articles to show the power of intention on random number generating, generators and these are really good controlled, like double, triple blinded controlled studies that I remember Mick West said I showed him the study and it's astounding. He says, oh, that those findings are just noise. And noise is not a statistical term. It's not, I'm a scientist. I've done these kind of studies. So, so I don't know at what level, but yeah, consciousness is, I see it as this thing that is inside us, with us, but also can be separate as well. It's sort of I guess a spiritual life force. Um, and and we shouldn't be surprised that some people have psychic ability. I mean, right? I mean, there are extremely intuitive, sensitive, empathic people, and we're all on the spectrum. But I could give you 5 experiences. I was with my mom in a grocery store, and she said I was about 6.5 years old, and we walked past this woman who just seemed fine. She was picking groceries, and I hold my mom's hand. I said, Mom, she's really upset. She's about to start crying. And my mom said, Oh, hi there. Are you okay? Burst into tears. Now, did I psychically predict that? No, I just couldn't breathe. I could feel her emotion so much I couldn't breathe. Was the greatest challenge of my therapeutic work is when someone comes in, I'm not reading their mind, but I can feel their emotion, and whether they're overtly, covertly, like sometimes they come in and express, but most people don't, right? They bottle it up,
Mm.
but I can feel it in different parts of my body, and I ache to help them out. I ache to relieve that is my reason to be. So consciousness, I think, is awareness. It's spiritual connectedness. It's an agent of communication. It can be an agent of healing. it can be an agent to understand self and others and our place in the universe. Um, it's basically magical. It's divine. I think you know, I think it's the heart of maybe all of this.
I get the sense that we have a very limited idea, at least the average person, of what consciousness is capable of. It seems like it's either on or off. It's like you're either in go to work, get stuff done mode or asleep. And there seems to be such a variety of states that you can exist in. And I wonder if maybe communicating with non-human intelligence just involves something as simple as mastering that mental realm and understanding the subtleties of reading information like that, transmitting it. You know, how do you learn to communicate in a completely new language that involves a different set of senses that we're not used to using every day, especially when the regular world is so loud
Yeah.
and intrusive and overwhelming. You know, and I think maybe that has something to do with why all the great spiritual teachers all seem to say the same thing: go out into the middle of nowhere, get away from all distractions, go into a cave and look within, and then you'll find the answers you're looking for. Do you think, and I'm curious, in your considering your expertise as a mental health professional and someone who studies anxiety intensively, how can you tell the difference between, like, sometimes I'll walk by, like you just described, I'll walk by somebody, I'll be in the park, maybe walking my dog or whatever, and I'll walk by someone, and when I walk by them, it's almost like, I don't know how else to describe this, so I'm going to make the sound. It's like walking by someone with static electricity coming off their body. It's like that feeling of a balloon lifting your hair off, and you can go walk by them and it feels like vroom, and then you just go. How can you tell the difference between picking up someone else's emotional state and your own anxiety just kicking in because you're, I don't know, someone's inside your personal space bubble? Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, I think it's what the feeling is like emotionally, because there's some chemical interaction. And is it positive or negative? Does it evoke curiosity or evoke kind of, I'm going to walk a little further away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for me in that grocery store, it was her heart is hurting and my heart is hurting, and I need to tell my mom about it because I don't know what to do with it. For you, walking past, there's curiosity, right? And I just should ask you, was it positive, negative feeling?
Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it just feels like anxiety. It feels like anxiety that rolls on and then it rolls off.
Yeah.
Almost like you're walking by a room where someone's listening to a radio and you can hear the station for a second and then you walk down the hall and it fades off. It's like, it's kind of like that.
Yeah. I
But
think
I also
there's
suffer from anxiety and I'm an anxious person, so I can't quite tell.
Well, and if you're suffer from anxiety, it's typically correlated with intuition,
Mhm.
empathy, um, the ability to connect and read people. I wouldn't give it up, even if in its worst stages. I mean, because you're more attuned you're hypersensitive to external and internal stimuli, and whether visible or not. So you and I, and there's studies to show that someone with anxiety disorders, the speed at which we can perceive threat versus non-threat words is faster. So you and I are going to press a button faster than your average other person, based on if a word that comes up, it's hot dog versus I don't know, car crash, or a bad example, but I've got all these studies on that. There's also studies to show that we're going to be more sensitive and receptive to other people's emotional mood,
Mm.
even when others might not see any nonverbal sort of changes. So yes, these things can be learned, but I think a lot of those people are selling books, I hate to say. Um, I think there is some predisposition to it, and you can develop those skills. And maybe you can develop if you don't have that predisposition, absolutely. But there's tremendous value in finding that balance of being acutely aware of self and surroundings at a level that doesn't consume you.
Yeah.
Um, you and I, the other study is that, and I'm going to say you as an I as just an example, but someone, we might be able to sense if someone is a sociopath or a sex offender
Mm.
um, quicker than someone else. I've had that experience. I was at a dinner table, um, and this person is already gone in jail, and but I felt like this is. I see if I can describe what the feeling was like. It was a friend of my wife's, really sweet, introduced us, came home with came over with a boyfriend, and liked all the others, but this one, he seemed nice, but I got this feeling like, if you've ever in your childhood, your parents have left you somewhere, even just for a little bit, and you've wondered, where are they? And you have this sinking feeling in your heart. Have you ever had that? Or as a parent,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, sit with my boy,
Yeah.
like, you know, it's like that plus something else that I'll tell you, and you'll relate to it. So there's these things that it's not something communicating. It's our consciousness that we need to tap into and give it confidence and faith, like believe in it, like not like an ego way, like I got a superpower, but like I'm gonna see where this. I'm gonna start to trust that my guesses are right.
That's an interesting way to put this. I'm reading a book right now. I'm just going. I should be done with it, but I'm just like, slowly going through it. This. It's by Ingo Swann. It's called Everybody's Guide to Natural ESP, and it's based on his time about. It's about his time at the Stanford Research Institute during the period where they were investigating remote viewing with Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff. In fact, the book is dedicated to Hal Puthoff, which is written in 1991. And in the book, he goes into detail describing his concept of how ESP functions with regard to our normal waking consciousness and everything else. And he kind of he diagrams all this out, and he describes it as it happens below the level of intuition. It's sub that. It's almost like being in a raft. This is me kind of putting it into my own words. Being in a raft on the water, and you can feel the water underneath the raft sort of lifting up, and can't see what's down there, but you can feel this. There's a sense of it's such a sensitive thing that you really have to understand how to listen to it. You have to teach yourself how to listen to it. And he said that in the experiments they were doing, they found that when they tried to verbally describe the things that they were seeing in these remote viewing experiments, they had a lot of difficulty getting accurate information. But as soon as they switched to drawing and avoided vocabulary altogether, and they just went straight to just drawing intuitively what they perceived, the results went through the roof. And they were able to take regular people and have them sit down and do a remote viewing session, and they were able to identify the target in another room, in an envelope, in a drawer, in a desk. They could see things, they could write it, and he shows side by side, this is the target, this is the picture that the RV person drew, this is a person who's never done this before, first time. It's just fascinating. It seems like there's a layer beneath, all of the conscious thought and all the clutter. There's this really subtle layer, and it's almost like it's made out of a mist. It's very delicate. You can't really interfere with it, but it's there. And if you learn how to read it, that could be a superpower. In a sense, what it means. I was about to ask you if you had ever had an opportunity to look at the Telepathy Tapes podcast and what you make of it. If you did, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but just curious.
Yeah, no, you did, and I didn't. It's on my list. But no, I haven't. Sorry.
That one is particularly interesting because they have these kids who are able to point to. I mean, there's one kid with an iPad, and the mother is across the room facing another direction. They give her an equation to put into a calculator. She's looking at the number, and then across the room, the kid types the number into the iPad just as fast as she can bring them up, and it's like it's a quantum leap from intuition and empathy, and it's into like this is symbol for symbol transference of data from one person to another, and it just seems to suggest to me that there are levels to this thing, and maybe indicates that there is some kind of a methodology that could be developed to train people to become really proficient instead of just every once in a while there's a what's it called, there was the phenomenon where nobody could run a 4-minute mile until the first person ran a 4-minute mile. And the very next year, like 150 people ran a 4-minute mile.
Sure. Well, I mean, it would be almost completely lack logic if our ability to perception and reading minds at all levels across the spectrum does not improve over time. I mean, of course, it's going there where we're going to be able to communicate at some point without words, or at least a certain percentage of it. I mean, we've all had many experiences where, God, I feel like something's bad happened to a friend of mine. I just know. And then you hear that something did, right? And it might not be exactly matched up. I know a psychic out in Colorado where I was deeply skeptical my whole life up until I spoke to this person actually, and not with me, but with a very close friend. I mean, XYZ, all accurate. Didn't have a name. Impossible details. Absolutely impossible. So yeah, there's a small percentage that were gifted with that magical ability at a young age. Now the hard part, mate, and you know this, is that it's going to attract a lot of charlatans.
Sure.
And people are going to exploit that, and then people hear that and they'll think, okay, we're going to assign that to everyone. How do we get through that? Like that's I find that the hard part because psychology experienced that actually in its early years, because people would exploit kind of people's vulnerabilities, and but then there were people that having real sort of great effects on other people's lives, but because of all the bad people, you're also a charlatan because you're in that space. So yeah, I think it rationally makes sense that it's something that can be developed. Some people have it naturally. I think it is the future, really, in many ways, or linked to the consciousness debate and field. For me, I'm really interested in like why I think there's a part of our existence that we can't know what happens after death, but we might get some glimpses. um, we know about this NDE with all these like very similar stories that like kind of eerily similar. And it's not just a story, it's not some like something that happens in the brain, because people will come back with these incredible abilities. Like, well, now I can paint paintings and I can play Chopin's C sharp minor, and I could play chopsticks, and there's too many examples of that. There's something going on with consciousness. There's something after death, but we have to believe that there isn't. That's the hard part. And so it's finding that balance. And I'm saying us. Is it us finding that balance? Yes. But no, I almost think there's an evolutionary reason why that balance is before us, or that conflict. Because, and just enough belief that something after death, so we don't, oh, fuck it, I'm just not going to get out of bed, to, no, there's nothing after death. So I'm going to make the most out of this day, this life. Right.
You need pressure to make a diamond out of a lump of coal. You got to put some pressure. So people need that. I could see that. It's like a Joseph Campbell kind of a thing. You have to believe you're going to die. And then even if you don't, as long as you believe it, that's the transformative. It's facing that certainty, and then overcoming it. And maybe consciousness continues, but up until that very last instant, you've got to think this is it for it to really have meaning. I can see that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Welcome back to The Night Shift, your safe space for talking about UFOs, UAPs, NHI, disclosure, and everything else your friends, family, and coworkers are so sick and tired of hearing you go on and on and on about. Listen, the next time you're met with a 1,000-yard stare, a blank expression, don't get mad. Just take a beat, stand up, turn around, and walk away. Because you don't need those people. You just need to believe in yourself and in them. Because they're real, and apparently they're here. But what do they want? And how is it going to affect you and me? These are the questions we explore here at Night Shift. We're not so much a podcast, we're more of a support group for wayward UFO enthusiasts. Somewhere between In Search of with Leonard Nimoy and that show where Jonathan Frakes rides in on a bicycle and asks a bunch of weird questions.
Ever gone mountain biking? What do you want to be when you grow up? What's the right tip?
I don't know, we're still working out the beats on this thing. But listen, if you've fallen down the UFO rabbit hole and you're just as lost and confused and disoriented as the rest of us, what you need is a guide, and we are that guide. So take me by the hand and hit that subscribe button. And while you're at it, don't forget to like and share this video. It's a heavy lift to build this channel from scratch, and I could use all the help I could get. Thanks in advance for being a part of Team Night Shift and the most exciting conversation happening anywhere on planet Earth. Do you think, not to get too Jungian on this, but do you think that the collective of what's, all of us together experiencing this very weird moment we're all living in, we're all kind of in our own news bubbles, you have different people sort of in different belief systems, as the mass of people starts to become more and more aware of the phenomenon in different ways, does that affect how we perceive it? Or what we perceive?
Not only how we perceive it, but I think it'll actually predict what we see and if we see it. That's going into woo territory.
Explain.
Okay, so you've got 7 people doing a CE5 in North Carolina or wherever he does it, right? Did the number of people help in evoking these sightings? Yes. Now people might say, well, there's the expectation, groupthink, and all that. Certainly a factor, but the healing ability of one person versus the healing ability of 5,000 people, I believe that's going to have an impact. I mean, 5 people are outside your hospital window praying and emanating thoughts of love and grace. I personally believe that is going to make some difference in your survival or recovery. If you have, the world believing in it, because we are what we think, and I think we construct our own realities in many ways. Now, if 20 of us, let's just create a chair in front of us. Is that going to happen? Okay, no. But what could happen is some forces. Like, there's the famous IKEA experiment. I think it was IKEA, where they had 2 plants, and they asked the customers, some customers to think of negative thoughts and drop in, I think, also a written statement that's negative, and then positive thoughts to the other plant. Within 2 weeks, that the negative plant that received all that negative stuff died, and the other plant flourished. Controlled study, controlled. Now, that might tell us that plants have more of a, they're more sophisticated, let's say, in regards to, I don't know, the way, they're tended but still, I think it's profound. I guess it's going back to intention, but I think it's group intention and shared intention and shared force and coming together. That's why I want everyone to come together more. It sounds cliche, but to come together to find that shared interest, shared goals, so that we can really kind of manifest what either is true, what we want to be true, what we believe to be true. It sounds mystical or magical, but there's a lot of rational sense to it. I could give you so many examples where I'm working with a family system, and they're parenting in a certain way that's really kind of destructive, a lot of expressed emotion and the way they're talking to the kid. And I'll spend hours, weeks, months working with the family on their language, not just their language, but how they walk into a room with emotion or not emotion, or walk in with, radical acceptance versus criticism, right? Not stating, but just feeling it. And it changes the kid. I mean, it really changes the
Hmm.
kid. And you'll know, like when you're in a good mood and you just feel great, something great happened. You walk around town, and especially in the South, people come up and everyone wants conversations. You go to the bank, hi, I got to devote 3 minutes to talk about the weather of my day. How's this day? It's lovely and it's sweet, but it's hard sometimes. But if you're in that zone and you do that, good shit happens. Karma is something very real.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not right away, but it's like, okay, what you give to the universe is going to come back. And I don't know the source or the force, but it is true.
It seems like the systems that make up we're a part of this very large spectrum of systems that doesn't just start and stop with the physical, but continues to go in different areas and different directions. And I remember seeing an interview, this was a while ago, with Ray Kurzweil, and he made this really interesting point, and it never had occurred to me before, but he said, when you have to have a new thought before the neurons can form to connect those new thoughts. In other words, the thought comes first, and then the physical matter of your brain organizes around the thought, but it's the thought that comes first.
Yep.
And I heard that, and just never, I could never get that out of my mind. It just stuck with me, and it was like, maybe the physical dimension is a shadow of this other higher. We're casting a shadow on the physical dimension in a sense. There's a higher level of energetics where everything is happening, and we're all much more connected. And if you could see it, it would look like being able to see Wi-Fi signals in the air, almost maybe something like that. And
I got a story about that before.
oh, go
That
ahead,
I'll
please,
tell you
please do.
about.
It just jump right in.
So I've got to be careful with, drug use. And I'm not, I abstain. I'm very conservative in that regard. The last time I smoked pot was, or was it a Fish or a not a Dead Show, Dave Matthews Band. It was good too. It's like
Everybody had Dave
Brownie or
Matthews.
Rice Krispie Cake. It was so fun. Maybe it was
Sure.
Neil Young. I can't, but
Yeah.
anyway, it's been a while, right? And, I can't give too many details, but I was at a friend's house and staying over with my wife, and I woke up in the middle of the night and hungry. Go in the freezer or fridge, some beautiful chocolates from, I thought Switzerland, but it ended up being Colorado, but beautiful box, right? It's like, oh, and she said, take anything you want from the fridge, like any good host would. And walked down, I have chocolate, and I was like, oh, this is good. And I was like, have another one. And an hour and a half later, my wife comes down. She's like, what are you doing? Standing there with my boxes in the kitchen, in someone else's
Sure.
house. We're in a guest room. They're in another room. Looks a little weird, right? If they came out.
Eating chocolate, yeah.
And I'm just like kind of frozen. And she said, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I must have fallen asleep. I'm okay. And she's like, well, come back up. I go back up to the room and fall asleep. 20 minutes later, I wake up, and it's a very fancy place. There's this crystal chandelier that was like morphing, and everything had this blue orb around it. And but the biggest thing was I started to see all the electrical communication and the terminology from phones. It was like basically like the matrix of, not the matrix, but all the data
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's all around us that we don't see, from this earpiece to there to my microphone lights. It's connected. It's all in the air. We don't see it, but I saw it. But I didn't know. I thought I ate chocolates. So, if you're going on a trip, you want to know you're going on it. Shaman would be nice too. I had neither of those.
There was a great oh man, there's such a great video. I'll have to find it, and if I can find it, I'll insert it into this interview. It was during the
Okay.
60s. They were doing experiments with people on LSD. They were dosing people with LSD and then watching them, housewives, regular folks, working people, and they would see things like that. They would describe, they're like, can't you see it? You can't see this? You can't see there's the field coming off of things. There's like, you can't, look at that wall. Can't you see it? And the doctor's in the room like, no, we can't see it. And I do wonder sometimes if we are actually tuning the dials of perception to open up a new channel that we can't perceive, or if you think that maybe that what you were seeing is just happening internally, if that's a chemical thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to be very open-minded to that.
Yeah.
Initially, sure, it was just, hey, the drug, I'm hallucinating because of this drug. But of course, there's value in not knowing, because, well, I haven't really thought about it, but there's going to be, right? I mean, it's
Well,
scary,
your
it's
experience was
unethical.
real. Whether you were
Right.
really seeing the actual data, I mean, you had I think that's
Hmm.
what John Mack would say about a lot of people. It's like, well, if it's a dream, it's still real. The dream was real,
Right.
right? Like, it's
It was
all.
real. I mean, so I'll continue. So my wife was there. We didn't know what was going on because they didn't know I was just ate a bunch of mushrooms, which
Mm.
is what it was, but a lot. And um, they thought, oh no, that's right. They thought the host said, oh yeah, they thought it was just weed. It was just pot. So it was like, so I got a bunch of other friends. A family came over. It was super embarrassing. And they're like, dude, it's just weed. Why are you freaking out? But literally, it was very intense. To the point where I was like, I need to get out. I'm going on the balcony. I want to jump off.
Oh,
Like
it's
it
the
was
worst. It's
really
the
bad.
worst when you're an anxious person, and yeah, and I
Yeah,
know it
okay.
well.
Phew. You're the
Yeah.
first time to normalize that, person to normalize that what I just did there. So thank you. Finally calmed down. It did linger for a couple of days, which I didn't know. Not the full, hallucination, but anyway. So yeah, I think, is that a means to connect at a higher level? I certainly think it could be. I'm not endorsing the uses. I can't, but I think there's something there.
I just sometimes wonder, almost as a just an intellectual exercise for the fun of it, if it's possible that maybe the right combination of, we'll call it psychedelics, in
Hmm.
tandem with the right setting, maybe, like, could you put a person in a sensory deprivation tank inside of a Faraday cage, give them the right dose of LSD or whatever, pick a psychedelic, and if they were trained properly, could that person be reliably go to another realm and bring back useful information? And could you do that at scale? Could you do it with 10 people, 100 people? Could you,
Hmm.
is there I don't know that anybody's really answered. Maybe the closest is the stuff that was done at SRI, but it just seems to me like, before this is all over, the conversation about UFOs, we are going to get to a point where we're doing stuff that's that weird. Somehow,
Yeah,
I just feel like this doesn't just end with a little UFO craft and some little gray being walking out of it. I feel like this is just a whole lot weirder than that. Do you?
that's smart. That's smart, Clint. And people are going to want science and data, and you're going to need, obviously, like, people to consent to that.
Hmm.
I don't even think it needs that big a sample size, but it does need a pretty good sample size, and then it's going to need some blind raters of what they're reporting. And I think what we're going to see is some, interaction or correlations between their experiences, and potentially maybe you need a bigger sample size to get. But is there some secret in that, in those revelations, or those, what they're seeing and experiencing? Fascinating.
There's a group in the UK, and I'll have to look them up, and I'll send you this. But who was it? Was it Andrew Gallimore? They're doing experiments dosing people with DMT through a IV. And the pitch that I heard for this was that we want to combine the science that we understand behind anesthesiology and dosing people with this drug. We know what DMT does, but what if we took what if what indigenous medicine men and shamans are doing is like the 1.0 version of this? Is there a way that we could apply technology and our expertise in medicine to take this to the next level? And could you give a group of people a sustained experience of being dosed with DMT long enough for them to actually go someplace else like an astronaut and come back? And if you did it enough times, would they be able to map that domain and provide any kind of sense of what it is? Is it consistent between people from one person to the next? If you did it 100 times, would they see the same things or would they see different things? I just
Yeah.
find that so fascinating. I feel like that's got to
And
be.
not physically, I mean, they're like mentally going to the same place, obviously.
Remember that movie called
Is
was
that
it?
what you're saying, though?
Yes, like
They're
it was some.
mentally going. They're not like physically going,
Remember
transported.
Altered States with William Hurt, where he was. They put him in the sensory deprivation tank, and they started having hallucinations, and he thought he
I,
was.
I I I don't know that. I was thinking about the Leonardo DiCaprio movie,
Oh,
the big
the
one.
dream one.
Yeah,
Yes, yes, yeah.
but
Inception.
Inception. Yeah, but I'll look up. What was the name of the other one?
It's called Altered States. It's William Hurt, and it's just about the experiments they were doing in sensory deprivation tanks. I just, I don't know. I spitball about this stuff a lot, and it's not every day that I have somebody with your background and expertise to spitball with. So it's fun to ask
Well,
these questions.
I appreciate this very kind of you. I mean, expertise is all relative. I mean, I'm not. There are people that do have expertise in this specific area, right? But I love the confluence of like shaman, neuroscience, deprivation or a controlled environment, really, and more targeted than it's been. Any study's been. I think the hard part is the ethics of it, and
Mm.
yes, you can have a willing participant, but does it make it ethical?
And we have this problem, it seems like, in the West between the material world. Our whole paradigm is so materialist that it's hard for us to describe anything that doesn't happen in the actual physical world as if it's real. We treat everything like it's this other thing. There's the real, and then there's just whatever else. And if it's not real, it can't be
Yeah, and if
serious.
it's not real, it doesn't have value almost because
Right.
yeah.
And I think
Mm.
about like Carlos Castaneda and the indigenous people who have a tradition of communicating with beings from other realms, and it's part of their culture. It's not even weird to them. There's a clip of a couple of indigenous folks from I forget where. I think it was in Brazil. They're on a podcast, and the host asked them, have you ever seen an alien? And they don't know what he's talking about. What do you mean an alien? He shows a picture of a gray, and they look at it and go, "Oh, that's not an alien. Those are the ant people. You don't know about this?
Mm-hmm.
This is, they just, for them, it was no big thing." And I feel like that's also a big part of the mystery here, that maybe we just
Mm-hmm.
don't possess the right tools to describe what we're seeing because we left all those tools behind a few
Or we're
hundred
seeing
years
the
ago.
same thing, we're just describing it differently, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Possibly. What would you like to see happen going forward? In the next, say, 5 to 10 years, we've talked about a little bit in this conversation about when's the other shoe going to drop. It seems like there is this buildup that is just beneath the surface, and it's been building for at least since 2017. Probably could go back longer than that, but definitely since 2017, it feels like there is a buildup. Do you get the sense that we are approaching some kind of a make or break moment where we're going to get some kind of clarity that is another order of magnitude beyond where we've been for the last 10 years, say? Or do you think that maybe we're just caught up in a hype cycle right now because it's so interesting and people are coming on board to this and everybody wants to be in on it?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like your opinion too, but and mine will change, week to week or month to month a little, but I hate to say it's kind of more of a hype cycle right now. I feel like it. I think we're hungry and thirsty for something big. I think disclosure is a personal a process because however much evidence, you know, we get, let's say the government releases all these files and or even comes out and say, okay, we have been in communication with extraterrestrials and MJ12 was true, like all of this stuff that we have been questioning, it's all true. There's still going to be some people that, nah, it's not good enough for me. I don't believe that, you know. I don't believe our
Until
government.
it really touches their lives in an actual personal.
Yeah, it's got to, touch their lives,
Hmm.
and maybe it will. Maybe it always has to stay at this religious level. Like, why did so many people get so excited? Because I can't speak for everyone, but religion. It's like you don't get a lot of tangible evidence. Like, I haven't seen much Jesus hanging around in the sky. I mean, I've been looking, but
Mm-hmm.
wait, there's orbs. There's UFO, and the military have seen them, and that's more that my religion's been giving me. So my fear is that it could go down a dark road. I say my greatest concern is cult, the creation of cults and cult-like behavior. I'm
Oh
in the
yeah.
business of empowering the self and being very wary of the charismatic leader, bringing groups together, and where does it end up? well, typically a sex cult, or just
I
suicide,
just
or
Heaven's Gate or have you? There's a great documentary on. Are you familiar with the Raelians? This group, the Raelians.
I am, yeah.
Have you
I've
seen
seen
that
every
doc?
cult documentary ever.
You've
Yeah,
seen that
I love
documentary,
that. Yeah, sure.
and it's like I love how it starts because it starts with this guy, and he's kind of maybe a little interesting, and then he's I heard this, I saw a craft, and I was given a message. Okay, and then it's like yada yada yada. A couple of years later, he's got a special jumpsuit. He's got these big shoulder pads.
Hmm.
He's climbing out of a UFO model. And then it's like a couple more years go by. This guy's sleeping with everybody's wives. And I'm like, meanwhile, the
Yeah,
cult
yeah.
people are just like, yeah, this is great. This is all. I'm thinking, are you for real? But I guess that's
Mhm.
what it is, right? You get pulled in, and there was the Heaven's Gate group. So you had
Yeah,
the Hale Bopp Comet and
yeah.
all these others. Do you think?
There's some
Uh,
subtle ones too that are. Go ahead.
Well, I'm familiar with the big ones like the Nexium and just of course Scientology, and it's. I guess what I'm driving at is, are we prepared? And maybe this is where the ontological shock comes in. But let's say, just hypothetically, that tomorrow or next week, the big contact event happens, the big C, the ships arrive. They're the size of Manhattan. They're over every major city in the world. They stay there for a month. Okay. There's
Hmm.
no question anymore. We're not alone, and it's staring us in the face. Do we have, as a human family, the tools? Are we even ready to process that, or do we hit an ontological wall where we just go insane? And half the people are like, these are gods, and the other people are like, these are demons, and some people are, do we just completely fracture and nobody knows what to do in the presence of such an awesome event?
Yeah, yeah. Because in our community, we'll hear, "Hey, we're ready. We're
Mm,
totally ready. We don't need it." But out there in the world, I mean, I grew up atheist. My dad was Jewish. My mom was atheist who became a Christian, and then I became like kind of born again Christian. I was searching in like 2004, and became a Christian. I wasn't like even full evangelical, but I believed I had a relationship with Christ, and I needed it, and it was great, and I felt real, but lost it to. I mean, it wasn't 2017. I didn't discover all that until 18, but I had an existential crisis because I couldn't believe in it anymore.
mm.
Like I let go of my Christian friends, the fellowship meetings I did. I stopped going to church. And that's me,
Was that
you know?
because of the experience that you had with the craft or the object, or is this separate from that?
I know it's connected. Yeah,
Connected.
it's connected, but I would say it I hadn't fully I knew it was something crazy, most likely out there, but could be plasma. I was still really convincing it was something prosaic.
Mm,
Um, it was really when the government said, "Hey, UFOs are real," and I got kind of like, "Oh, well, that means, right, that aliens are real." But
mm.
of course, that was a lot of marketing and hype. Um, but I really got like obviously sucked and pulled right into that. My concern is that 30% or 40% of the country, evangelical Christians, they're either going to deny this adamantly, and it's civil war, who knows, or they're going to try to accept it, and it's going to be really difficult. I mean, I wasn't on the full end of that, but I was a believer, and I know a lot of people actually that kind of let their Christian beliefs go or their religious beliefs go, or some that incorporate it. Right? I mean, the greatest incorporation of a big change that happened in Christianity, or I guess we can't call it Christianity, but when Jesus died, it's like, oh my God, Jesus was supervised. I mean, supervised, crucified. Well,
Hmm.
what do we do now? Oh, let's spin. Let's go to good spin. He died, raised from heaven. Worship him. So what it does show is humans are incredibly good at adapting and reframing and changing a narrative and changing the way we view history to make it make sense. Evolutionary again, survival tool to make sense of the past so that we can create a functional future. So we can function in the future, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And make things that we can't explain make sense, or just trauma that we don't want to make sense, I mean, 9/11 conspiracy. Yeah, I mean, you do some searches and, there's all this, hedging, all this stock market stuff a few days before. It's
Mm.
not a conspiracy theory. I mean, that was a terrorist attack. I'm sorry. I mean, I know there's people believe in it, but it just didn't happen. But it's our inclination. Like, we want to figure out why. Like, can there be one person that can kill JFK? Can, eight guys blow up, World Trade Center, Pentagon? Yeah, people can do incredible things. They can build pyramids, like, over a long
Yeah.
period of time, short period of time. We want explanations for things that just seem, amazing. But and there's some, I know there's some that the government's hiding. Like, it's very weird and concerning. And
It feels like
when I
we're being
see,
gaslit, like all around. There's just
yeah,
so much weirdness, and everyone agrees the government keeps secrets, probably about some pretty crazy dark stuff. Sure, I don't think
mhm,
anybody has trouble with that. And then believing in aliens, that's pretty. I think most people are on board that we're not alone. And I think you can make that a
yeah,
case
they're out there somewhere.
somewhere. And then I think the question of like, okay, well, now things seem to be heating up. We're hearing about it a lot more. Okay, I could see that. But I wonder to what extent it's amplified by a sense of insecurity about the future that is pervasive, that maybe started with probably before COVID. But COVID certainly driving that home and shocking the world out of into a state of like, oh, we all have to stop what we're doing now. Like we really have to face this thing. And that caused people, I think, to have a little bit of a crisis moment, a come to Jesus moment. And I wonder if maybe collectively we're just harboring so much anxiety about the uncertainty of the future and the nuclear
Yeah.
proliferation and all the chaos in the world that maybe we're hoping that something just shows up and puts a stop to everything. Maybe we get another big
Mhm.
break. Do you think
Yeah,
that could be something? Could there be something there?
I do. I mean, if you look at the UFO waves or of interest during Cold War, I mean, and now with Ukraine and the coronavirus, we're all at home and yeah, it's absolutely linked to fear. We need to know that we're going to be okay, that there's someone either going to save us or, how do we tolerate with threat? You know, really what anxiety and threat is about is like, how bad is that threat and can I handle that threat? Like
Yeah.
anxiety is, degree of threat over resources. We've got a bigger equation to explain it. Um, and and yeah, we want to feel like protected and or saved, or that it's not true and that we're going to be fine. What I can tell you, the government will never tell us. They will never disclose anything because no government will tell you that there's a power higher than them,
Yeah.
especially out of this world. America will never do that. They will never, they will do whatever it takes to keep this information secret. So I'm not holding out hope for them at all. I think the answer is in our own personal journey, in the experiences of others. So give value and weight to those. Try not to jump, and you guys don't, but a lot of people do, is like jump to well, it's probably a star, it's probably this. Get their emotional experience. Start out by believing and then, step backwards, right? But I government will never release that. Then they can't control the people. Like then there's anarchy, most likely.
That's coming kind of full circle back to the Chris Bledsoe thing. I think is
Mm.
interesting. He did a interview on his son's podcast recently, and he talked about the government's response to orb sightings and what the drone fiasco in New Jersey and New York and all of this, his take on it. And his sense was that what they're concerned about is the fact that everyone can communicate with these things, that there's an open channel. We just don't realize there's an open channel. But if we really took that on board, everyone could make contact. Now, what happens if 100,000, 100 million, a billion people start to do this? Do we open a doorway to this experience that the government has no control over? Do we cut them out? And I thought, man, that's a really interesting perspective. I hadn't considered that. But what if it's just that simple? If once we, because you're right, once we accept that they're here, well, it's clear that the American military is not in charge of anything. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly. So,
Yeah.
so who is in charge? And when people become hip to that, it's almost, it was like you and I were talking on the phone a couple of weeks ago about when the Soviet Union collapsed, and it was almost like a collapse in belief. People just had to give up on the idea, and then suddenly, once they all looked around, look to your left, look to your right, and everybody's like, "Are we done? We're done? Okay, well,
All right, let's put the guns down.
it's over." And then
Went
it's
from
like
shooting you to hugging and celebrating.
and chaos, and then because then of course, years of just figuring out what to do next, and the economy falls apart. Maybe that's what we're looking at in a global sense, a collapse in
Yeah.
belief.
I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, they love religious belief because it tempers a population. It's focused on good deeds typically. And you can't prove it. But shit, hey, we kind of got something. Not saying it's a religion, but it comes with proof. And if you want to control the information, I've owned a company and I've worked for companies where, there's typically a few powerful people. They control that who communicates with who.
Hmm.
Like if I'm lower on the totem pole and I'm communicating to the boss, I'll get in trouble for that. So it sort of makes me think that, yeah, they are fearful of that. Let's say that all these groups are able to communicate with this outside force. How are we going to control? Like they're going to form an alliance, and we need to be in control of this communication, right? That what you
Yeah,
were kind of referring to, like the government does, or
yeah.
whoever.
I mean, and that's the real question is, who is the government? Who are we talking about here?
Mm.
I think that's the other problem. We can't get our hands around this because we don't know who's in charge. We don't know who knows what. The unknown unknowns are pretty much all we have.
Yeah,
We've got, we have whistleblowers. Carl Nell has probably got the best, most bulletproof resume of anybody, and he's saying
totally,
zero doubt.
totally. Zero doubt.
Well, zero doubt is, from a military man like that, that's pretty clear. So then, okay,
Yeah.
well, what now? Do we go
Yeah.
to work? Do we keep doing, do we run the rat race? Do we, what do we do?
But doesn't it concern you that it's zero doubt, but then he presents an argument for why it's zero doubt, not evidence of truth, but there's sufficient evidence for him to say that it's 100% true.
That's an interesting question because I did just watch this clip again today. I went through and watched it, and I watched what he says right after, and he says there's zero doubt. And he goes, well, how do you know there's zero doubt? And then he goes, well, let's talk about the data. And then he says you have people of Heimashed, the head of the Israeli space program. He talks about Heimashed. He talks about Paul Hellyer, the Canadian,
Elizondo,
and others.
Canadian guy.
And that, for one, it kind of floors me because Heimashed and Paul Hellyer both said that there's a galactic federation. That's their term. A galactic federation like Star Trek, where there's like a room full of goofy looking different aliens and they're all sitting around a table making decisions about stuff. Well, that's what they're talking about. Now, if you look at Carl Nell's LinkedIn profile and you look at where he's worked and you look at his experience, this is probably, if there was ever a person who knows for sure, it's him. It's got to be.
Yeah.
So I can't tell. I don't know what to make of that. That's where the woo comes into, collides with the believable for me. And I feel like, oh, now I just don't know what to grab onto anymore. That's very.
Yeah. And we also don't want to get sucked into that cognitive bias of, okay, because the Israeli guy, I can't pronounce his name, believes something extreme does not discredit him or his credibility. It's like, and that's going to be very easy. That's what skeptics do. Well, they look for things like that. I mean, we still want to consider that. It's a little concerning, but I agree. Colonel Nell is totally up there in who I sort of trust and respect and a lot of credibility. David Fravor's like simple story, the way he presents that, matter of fact,
boring almost.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. Right.
So routine that it's well, David Fravor and a lot of these pilots, they're just like, yeah, this is what I saw. Can't explain it, but that's definitely not ours. Okay.
Remember, for everyone to remember that 99%, whatever the percentage is, of our sightings are going to be wrong. We're gonna look like a schmuck, an idiot when we have a sighting. Great evidence, post it. it's going to be wrong. Chris Bledsoe is going to be 97% wrong with everything he posts. It's going to be a satellite. It's going to be
Yeah,
something
yeah.
else. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have that ability, or that he hasn't seen something that's very real. There's a, it's just, there's all cognitive biases. Now, yes, it's we want to make it. I believe in Bayesian reasoning and adjusting our determination of truth based on probability, right? Based on new data. But just be very wary, and I'm not saying you, but people I see in the skeptical world, is okay, go fast was going slow. Go, all of this is bullshit. I
Sure.
mean,
I
yeah.
think you're right. I think the role of the skeptic, they play a very important role. It's important to be skeptical. It's like having a functioning immune system. But if your immune system goes haywire, that's not good either. There's a balance there. And I'm with you. I think we have to keep a level head, but an open mind. I think we have to ask very street smart, simple, straightforward questions. Who are we dealing with?
Hmm.
Are they a threat? How many different species? How many different races? Are we talking about physical beings? Are we talking about something more esoteric? Can we drill down to brass tacks and get to
Yeah.
some kind of is there a real, what's the tangible reality of this? And then we can expand out from there. I think that's why we're so focused on disclosure from the government, is because there's nuts and bolts, weights and measures. We can actually get our mind around this. When you start talking to people like, Chris Bledsoe, who I take at his word. I really like Chris Bledsoe as a person. I think he's a very unlikely person to be spinning yarns, given his
Mhm.
his background, the region he's from, just the type of a man that he is, and watching his
Mhm.
family and him interact.
Sure.
But he's put a date on the calendar. He says Easter 2026.
Mhm.
It's all going to come together.
Yeah.
He's got a
Why?
great. His son recently read the transcript of his hypnotic regression. That you might find that really interesting if you haven't already
Yeah.
listened to it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty skeptical. I have deep concerns about using hypnosis for unearthing, regressed memories. Another topic, but I do a lot of hypnosis. But I'm really curious about, and I'm not sure time wise where we're at, because I want to bring up another topic. How are we doing for time?
I'm good for like another maybe 10 minutes, and then I've got to wrap.
Perfect, great. Yeah, that sounds good for me. So where were you at with the Jake Barber sort of reveal? And I'd love to hear, because I haven't spoken to you since that happened.
Ooh, Jake Barber's an interesting case. I have questions. I have questions about a lot of stuff. My instinct. Okay, so if you go back to watch Jake Barber's original interview with Ross Coulthard, the uncut full, I think it's like a 3-hour interview.
Hmm.
Within the first 20 minutes of that interview, Jake Barber sits down and he makes the following statement, more or less. I'm going to paraphrase, but he basically says, "My job as an intelligence asset was to create a cover that was completely believable. And the best way to do that is to come right out
You're
front."
gonna meet my girl now.
Oh, hi. She's a cutie.
That's Clint.
Hey, little one.
Okay. Hey, hey, thank you for the heart. Go, 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 go outside. Okay, shut the door. Right, if you could shut the door, thank you. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Those are the best kind of interruptions.
Yeah.
You have Jake Barber in this original interview with Ross Coulthard. Within 20 minutes of the interview starting, he says, "Look, if when I was working in my professional capacity, doing this undercover work, I had to establish a cover. The best way to establish a cover was to come out and do real things and start a real business and get involved in all these real things. And that gave me the legitimacy that I needed. If anybody looked into me, they would see, okay, this is who he is." And he's like, "I can't prove to you that I'm not doing that now." He makes that
Mhm.
statement. And then he goes on to tell this insane story. There's a part of me that wants to really believe him, particularly the part where he chokes up on camera when he's talking about the telepathic encounter he had with this craft that he was transporting. And
Sure.
there's the deeper, more intuitive part of me says, trust this, trust that. That's real. But on the other hand, where did News Nation come from? Like, where did they come from? They out of nowhere one day. There's this like fully staffed news thing that's News Nation, and they're putting out all this very professional looking content, and it's like it looks
Yeah.
like a legitimate news operation, but I just feel like there's something not connecting for me. They were not there, and then they're there, and they're just churning out UFO content. And Ross Coulthard is like the PR guy. He's interviewing all these people. He's bringing them out. They all now seem to be spectacular people, spectacular witnesses, whistleblowers.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I can't shake the feeling that there's something else going on here that we just don't quite know.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at. I just don't know.
So the emotion part, like, what that tells me is that, he's a sensitive guy. Something emotional happened. Was it related to that or something else in his life? Maybe a combination, but it makes him more believable. I'm more likely to be attracted to that. The biggest concerns I had is the helicopter, the rope. That's many questions, like the weight of it. Like there's a lot of unanswered questions that I would go to, not as a me being like skeptical and trying to disprove it, but just like out of fascination. Like I kind of want to know more about this object because it sounded like there's this object that's at a training range, part of the training range. Can you go pick it up, right, and bring it back over here, and someone else is going to take it? Because short distances, right, with those helicopters and a rope, and under 5,000 pounds, I believe. I actually looked it up.
I mean, it can't be more than a few miles that it's moving from one place to the next. Sure,
right, a few miles, and then visibility. It's not going to be off a training range because someone could see it. It's at night, so he's looking down. Now, the first post I saw after it happened was Greenwald's saying aerostat balloon or vacuum filled balloon. Now, another bias, right, is, oh, explanation, must be that. And I caught myself doing that. It's like, he's figured it out, right? Because we want almost those. So, and I retracted that. And actually, I think he gave me a like on that because, I just acknowledged that I just jumped to assuming, that Jake didn't look into a bunch of things like that. Like, I'm sure he did research and sort of prove that it wasn't an aerostat balloon based on a number of factors. But unless we hear that, it's sort of hard to fully know that.
Well, I imagine you're right about the weight thing. Like he's in this helicopter, they hitch up to this thing, then he, applies some power, the craft lifts. He's going to have to know how much this thing weighs. And I'm sure there would be, if it was an aerostat balloon, that seems like it would be a pretty easy thing to determine at the time.
Right. Yeah. Because, it's vacuum filled, right? So it's probably light. It's a big one. But when you see it land, it kind of just drifts off.
Yeah.
Now that could be just from the rotor of the helicopter, but wouldn't it be transported by truck? Like I'm imagining Roswell, there's these series of trucks that are taking them up to Ohio or wherever they went, or everything's done in such secret. And the 8 gone thing, that I was more curious about that, but why wouldn't you record that? Like, I don't want to be this person, interviewing a skeptic, but why record that one versus not? How are you able to release this? Maybe the government let him release this one because, hey, it's not a secret thing.
So that comes to what I'm getting at with News Nation is that I feel like News Nation is the steam valve. It's the pressure valve. That's a controlled release of information that seems to be coming from it comes from a source that looks very authoritative. Like when you look at it, it's like, this is the news. There's a red, white, and blue, and everybody's very smart and they're dressed perfect, and they're, addressing each other very professionally. But that seems to me to almost just be, it feels like a smokescreen almost. I'm not saying that the information that's coming out of there isn't accurate. It might be, but I just get a weird sense about the way it's being delivered. Now, I'm also curious about, just going back to what you said about Barber's, the 8 gone. I think he said the 8 gone was the one that he had the emotional experience with. Was it the 8 gone or was it the?
Yeah, it was.
Is it possible? If we start from a place, if we assume that the mental realm is very much real, and that telepathy is a real ability, and there is something like a psychic internet, and there is a hierarchy of beings that can use this at different levels, just like any other sense, right? Like a owl has better vision than a person. Maybe there's different beings that have different acuity levels for this talent. Could if you were a species that had command over such abilities, and you wanted to wage war or wage a conflict or defeat another group, how would you use something like this? And it made me wonder. What he described is this overwhelming sense of love and joy, almost like getting just a blast of morphine or something. It was just like over. Could that be like a love bomb or some kind of a telepathic, almost like an attack in a way where you're enraptured by this thing and it's got you in this ecstatic state. And then you go back and you're like, these guys are wonderful. They're great. Don't you want them to come here? Isn't this great? Wouldn't this be wonderful if they came and they just solved our problem? Wouldn't that be great? Almost like a sleeper agent, like somebody who just gets activated.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a thought. It's just a
No,
thought.
that's a good. I mean, that's a good thought. It reminds me of in England, when they captured Nazis. Obviously, what the Nazis did to folks was horrific. But the British, they would put them, high-level Nazis into a beautiful country estate. They would give them good healthcare. They would communicate like this. We're so sorry. It must have been really traumatic what you've been through and difficult. We want to make this stay as comfortable as possible. You can have tea at 4. We will only do tennis on the weekends. And they were like, we thought we were going to get terrorized and tortured. And here they are killing them with kindness. Within a week, they got every information that they wanted to get. Now, that's a cool strategic way than Guantanamo kind of, tactics, right? But sure, I mean, what a way to disarm, right? You disarm with love. So, it's a theory, right?
It's a hypothesis. If it's anything,
Hypothesis.
it's definitely
Yeah,
worth.
hypothesis. Yeah.
It's one of those things. We won't know until we get more data to work with. But I think this idea, for my part, I'm not convinced that it's all love and light. I'm not sold that there's no threat. I'm not convinced that it's all a threat. I don't know. I think we stand at the threshold of an entirely new world, and I think we have to be super cautious. And I think we should proceed very carefully with our next steps. But we have to have information. We just don't have it. And in this vacuum, we're filling it up with speculation, and who knows where that leads.
Yeah. But my belief is, they're real, they're visiting, they're crashing, or if they're that advanced, why are they crashing? They're not God, like they're not impervious to bad things happening. But they're visiting. Are they abducting? Yeah, most likely. It would make sense. I mean, what their intentions are, we don't know. Where they're from, we don't know. But they're absolutely here, and something will unfold. Things will unfold. The slow drip kind of hypothesis makes sense to do it gradually. I mean, we've adapted well over the last 5 years. Look how far we've come. Like we can all talk about it. 40% of the country now believes that.
Isn't that wild? How quickly we made that jump?
Right.
We went from you talk about it too much, you could lose your job, to Joe Rogan interviews Lou Elizondo and it gets like 40 million views in a month. It's some unbelievable number. Dan, I could do this for another 4 hours with you. This has been so fun. I would really love to talk again in more depth about each one of these topics that we got into, particularly the abduction thing. Is there anything else that you want to bring up before we wrap it up for today?
I mean, yeah, and I had plans to have sort of my notes just because I can, when engaging conversation, you kind of forget some things. But no, I mean, I love what we talked about. I thought we got to some good things. My main thing is like being really wary of the divisiveness of, a lot of people like, okay, who are good and bad in this industry, right? Or in this field. And publicly scrutinizing people, taking them down on Twitter. If you don't like someone or what they're saying, just ignore, block. You don't have to, publicly shame them. Like that's something that like deeply, like I get upset about. I want people to see the good things in each other. Like, there's something really good in from Mick West to Stephen Greenstreet to someone from the totally other end, like Jake Barber.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of I like about him, but Stephen Greer, right? He's predicted so much from 20 years ago. He was talking about this stuff. So none of us is going to have all the right information. None of those guys are. People make a lot of assumptions about someone's disposition versus the situational things and dispositional things. Assume that, okay, we're all normal people, good people who sometimes make good choices, sometimes make bad choices. Sometimes identify correctly, sometimes not identify correctly. It doesn't mean that, okay, this one's a hoaxer, this one's a charlatan, this one's a plant. Like this, all the terms that are thrown around, it's just so unnecessary, and I think it's just hurting the movement. I mean, if you look at my page and there's just the comments, I'm really trying to unite. And the number of times I got, he is a DOD plant, he works for the DOD. I mean, I'm just seeing so much of that. Now,
Yeah.
is there some government involvement and control over this information? Oh yeah, I mean, we've got Susan Goff leaning over, and in
Sure.
what I think was the ex-post of the year, Stockholm Syndrome was brilliant, if you remember that. That's creepy. That's weird. What is she doing there? They are controlling and controlling information, absolutely. But they'll never release it. Is it as good as you want it to be? Is it astounding? It might not even be. I mean, I think the phenomenon is really smart, really elusive, doing this extremely gradually, and probably thinks that, hey, if I'm going to connect with this place called Earth, I'm going to connect with the people. You know what? I might even start with the kids, Clint.
Yeah.
The like the school kids in Africa and and Wales, or wherever the other one was in the UK, right? The most open-hearted kids that haven't been infiltrated with, belief systems yet, and that are open-minded, open-hearted to kind of accept that information. And that's where consciousness comes back in. And can we return to that childlike state of wonder and be receptive to that spiritual force, that phenomenon that's out there, that is reaching out and wanting to connect, and I think will ultimately connect all of us too. That's my hope and dream.
That's a perfect place to leave it. Dan, this has been a spectacular chat. Let's do it again soon.
Well, thanks, Clint. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Buddy.
Bye-bye.